Okay, Rabbi Say, let's get started on the halachas of covering your hair, women covering their hair. Now, well, connected to the parsha a little bit, for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, it was this past week's parsha. For the Bnei Chutz La'aretz, it's coming up. Ein ben Pelas, who when he was trying to get out of, his wife convinced him not to go and follow Korach. The way of keeping everybody away was her uncovering her hair, and that way nobody was going to go near the tent. They were frum enough to fight against Moshe Rabbeinu, but they were too frum to see a woman with uncovered hair. So let's go with that sugya of women covering their hair. Now, why does a woman need to cover her hair? What is it all about? What's the makar? So there is a Mishnah in Ksubas which lists the women that when they get divorced, these women are not entitled to their ksuba. Why are they not entitled to the ksuba? Because they did something wrong and it's their fault that the marriage is not continuing, and therefore they are not entitled to their ksuba. The Mishnah lists two separate categories of faults that the woman could do. Either she's over al das Moshe, which seemingly is a deraisa problem, and the examples that are given are things that really affect the husband. They're categories of examples that affect the husband, like feeding the husband food that isn't meisered. So that's something that ruins their relationship, and it is something that's over deraisa. The other category is called das Yehudis, where you're over al das Yehudis. Just a little point, das Yehudis is not das like knowledge. There's no ayin in there. Das means like a rule. So it's not outright straight law. It's a rule, the Jewish rules, and you're over on das Yehudis. Now, what are these? So one of the examples listed is when the woman goes into the shuk rosh perua with her hair uncovered. So if a woman goes into the shuk with her hair uncovered, and the husband wants to divorce her, the husband can divorce her, and she loses any right to her ksuba. Now, what is this das Yehudis? So it's not so clear whether it's a Isser D'Rabbanan or it is some form of a minhag. But even if it is some form of a minhag, it is a very high level, non-negotiable minhag. It's a type of minhag that has been universally accepted in Klal Yisrael, and it is absolutely nothing to discuss. There's no way of not keeping this das Yehudis. It can't be that's not my minhag. When it comes to das Yehudis, if it is a minhag, it is a minhag universally. The lashon of Rashi is noted that it is one of these high-level minhagim. The Gemara asks on that Mishnah, the das Yehudis, what do you mean? Deraisa. Surely it's deraisa for that a woman's not allowed to go with her hair uncovered. And the Gemara answers by explaining the Mishnah with the ukimta, that the Mishnah was referring to a case when she was wearing a kalsa on her head, which is some form of a basket. So when she's wearing this basket on her head, then she's over das Yehudis. But if she goes completely rosh perua, then she would be over the Issa Deraisa. What is this kalsa? I imagine, it's not very clear what exactly it is. I imagine it's some type of like wicker basket or something like that, which has significant holes in between the threading of the basket, and therefore, even though as on a greater sense she's covered, but you could see through and see some of her hairs. That's what it seems to be. Now, fine. But the Reisa is completely Rosh Perua. Now, what is the pasuk? What is the source of proving that it's the Reisa? The source is from Parshas Nasai, where it discusses talking about an Isha Saita, that the Kohen goes and uncovers her hair. Now, for your hair to get uncovered, it has to be covered in the first place. So the Torah takes it for granted and understood that her hair must be covered, and therefore that's the only way you uncover it if it is covered. So we see from the Torah the expectation of her hair being covered, and therefore her going with her hair covered is deraisa. Now this is a very strange makar. It's a very strange source because there's no ashara there. The Torah is never telling us this din that you have to cover your hair. Rather, it's some form of a proof that we see in the Torah, that the Torah expects that her hair will be covered, but it's not actually a direct source. In Lumdish terminology, it is a siman to the fact that this is a rule. It's not a makar be'etzim. Okay, but Lamaisa, either way, it's quite clear that the Gemara treats it as an Issa D'Oraisa. Lamaisa Tachlis, most of the Rishonim, or come out all the Rishonim except the Rambam, hold and take the Gemara at face value and say that covering here is an Issa D'Oraisa, a Chiyav D'Oraisa, I should say, that a woman needs to cover her hair. The Rambam happens to learn it doesn't really mean D'Oraisa, etc., and he learns that as D'Rabbanan, Tzarchin, exactly how he learns the Gemara. Tachlis, at the end of the day, all the Paiskim, the Mishnah Brura, all the Achronim, everybody goes with the fact that the Chiyav of a woman covering her hair in the Shuk is Mid'Oraisa. Okay. There's also Gemara in Brachos that when it's discussing making brachos, they're saying Kriya Shema in front of a woman. You can't say Kriya Shema in front of a woman because Se'er Be'isha Erva. So we treat the hair of a woman like an erva. Memela, once you treat it like an erva, there's the isser of saying a davar shebekadusha in front of that erva. However, it's not absolutely clear how the Gemara knows that the Se'er Be'isha is erva. L'chayra, it ties back to the sugya of Saita. Okay. Now, Tachas, who does this Isser apply to? Who does it apply to? So, at first glance, there's a Shulchan Aruch which is very startling. It says, Achas Penuya, Va'achas Eishas Ish, they have to cover their hair. They can't go out with Rish Perua, which is a little startling. Like, what? Single girls have to cover their hair? That's not how, what? That's not what we're used to. What's going on over here? Who said that single girls have to cover their hair? That doesn't sound right. So what's going on? Well, there's actually another Shulchan Aruch. This is the first one that I quoted was in Even Ezer. This second one is in Orach Chaim, Ayin Hey, Siman Ayin Hey, which it says that the Psulos would go out, Barosh Perua, the Pasulis would go out with their hair uncovered. So therefore, there's a stira. Do the Pasulis go out with their hair uncovered or not covered? One Shulchan Aruch and Even Ezer says it's asur for them to go out with their hair uncovered, whereas in Orach Chaim it says they're allowed to go out with their hair uncovered. And almost everybody explains that when the Shulchan Aruch and Even Ezer says a woman, a Penuya, has to cover her hair, it doesn't mean a single girl who was never married. Rather, it means a single girl who was divorced or widowed. So this single girl who was divorced or widowed needs to cover her hair. But a Basula who was never married does not need to cover her hair. There is another pshat out there, just which we don't really go by, but just to make note of. I believe it's at the Magen Avram, if I remember correctly, who says that even Isha Penuya from that Shulchan Aruch can't go out with her hair perua. She needs it to be braided. And therefore, there is a minhag that single girls go out with braided hair and never with their hair free-flowing, because of they learned that the Shulchan Aruch is not saying that it needs to be covered over there, but the Shulchan Aruch is rather saying it can't be free-flowing, it can't be perua, but rather it has to be braided. That's not the minhag in most circles. There are places, Yerushalmis, some of the Yerushalmi circles have this, that even single girls need to have their hair braided.
Is Mizrahi also?
Is Mizrahi also? Yeah? Maybe. I've never... Oh, could be. Okay. And there's also to note that I was thinking there is definitely a lot of places have the minhag that single girls do not wear their hair down. Rather, their hair is always at least in a ponytail or something of the sort. I was wondering if or maybe originally that idea, definitely there's a sneeze point to it maybe as well, but I wonder if some of that is based on this, of a Penuya not going to Rosh Perua, this Magen Avram. I wonder if some of it's based on that. Maybe yeah, maybe not. Okay. The Maisa, in most circles, it's not the minhag, in most circles, single girls go, no problem. Okay. Now, as we explained, that we said that quite clear, Shulchan Aruch divorced women and widowed women have to wear a sheitel. Have to cover their hair at least. And then you get into whether sheitels are mutter or also, that we have to get into soon. But they have to cover their hair. Now, this seems to be pretty clear-cut, pretty universal. There's nobody that argues. And just seems pretty straight up. Comes along a famous Igros Moshe, Even Ezer. It's in the first Chelek, Simin Nun Zayin. And Rav Moshe Feinstein gets a question about a almana, that the only way for her to be able to support her children is by getting this job, which would require her to have her hair uncovered in the office. And you got to understand, back in the day, there were the boss was probably Jewish and didn't want any of this type of from narishkeit from his view in his office place. That's probably what it was. Didn't say, but from my historical background, that's probably what it was. And for her to get this job, she could only get it if she would come with her hair uncovered. And Rav Moshe, with his tremendous koyach chetera, was matter her to uncover her hair based on 3 chidushim. The first chiddush of Rav Moshe was that this idea of covering the hair, since we don't have explicit mikar to it, and based on 2 pshatim and Rashi, without getting too involved, it's a suffix whether we treat it as a chiv asay or a chiv loisa, or is it a loisa say? Is it a positive mitzvah to cover your hair, or is it a loisa say you're not allowed to have your hair uncovered? That's a suffix. Number 2, Rav Moshe says that covering of the hair is for a almana, or grusha for that matter, is only a chiyuv derabanan. How does he get this? Because Dr. Moshe, what's the makar? The makar is from Isha Saita. Isha Saita is by definition married. So if the makar is coming from Isha Saita, is by definition married, so Almana Grusha can't have a Chiyav Deraisa. Therefore, what's the Chiyav of Almana Grusha? The Chiyav of Almana Grusha maxes out at Das Yehudis, which we'll call Derabanan. So therefore, Rav Moshe says, so it's a Chiyav Asay, which is it's a suffix whether it's Asay or Loisay. By a Derabanan, we could say suffix Derabanan L'Kula, and we could treat it like a Asay. So based on those first 2 chedushim, the result is we could view this as a chiyav asay. Once we view it as asay, there's a halacha by a loisa say. If somebody says, do this loisa say, do this avera, or I'll take away all your money. You have to give up all your money not to be over a loisa say. But if somebody tells you don't do this asay, you have to give up to 1/6 of your money to do a asay. If it's going to cost you more of, let's say this lulav and esrog is a mitzvah say to shake the lulav and esrog. If it's going to cost you more than 1/6 of your money, you're not mechayev to spend more than 1/6 of your money on that esrog. Rav Moshe has his 3rd chiddush, and he says, even though one might view it as menias revach, not getting a further advantage, Rav Moshe says not accepting that high-paying job for this woman is like giving up 1/6 of her assets, and therefore, since it's like giving up a 1/6 of her assets, she's allowed to be over an asay. She's not mechuyev to keep this asay, and she can be over the asay and uncover her hair in the office. Tremendous chiddush of Moshe, a 3-pronged chiddush. It's very clear. We can understand why there were many that did not like this chiddush of Moshe. The first menias revach equals giving up 1/6 of your money. That's debatable. But once again, we were talking about the case was, just to be clear, of the pshas hatchak of the kasha. It was this almana couldn't support her children in any other way. So there was definitely a serious pshas hatchak in the question. Okay, that was that chiddush. Then there was a later Igros Moshe, Even Ezer, Chelek Dalad, Simin Lamed Beis, and the 4th section. This was like a brilliant tshuva where obviously Chasher Rav asked like 12 powerful questions to Rav Moshe, and he goes one by one answering them. So in the 4th question that he's answering in that tshuva, he The question is, Ramesha, I know you were matter that case of the almana that needed to uncover her hair to get a job. How about I have a case of this lady, this divorcee, and she wants to go on the first couple of dates on a shidduch date, with the first couple of dates with her hair uncovered, because she doesn't want the man to know that she was once married. She only wants to reveal that a couple of dates in, because she feels that if she does it right away, the man won't give her a chance. But if she reveals it a couple of dates in, then the man will already like her, and then will accept it. So she wants, in order to get married, could she go on these couple of dates with her hair uncovered? And Ramesha is matter there as well. He doesn't go through the whole arichas in that tshuva, but he says he's going to be matter there as well. Once again, as you can imagine, not everybody loved this heter of Ramesha. Okay, now.
So maybe that's something that wasn't outside.
Interesting, correct, because you had something that I didn't get into yet, but you're right, or you bring up a very good point, that we're much more machmir about Yotzei B'Shuk. The office is a little bit more complicated, but this was at least a relatively private shidduch date. I mean, I don't know exactly where they're going to, but okay, maybe there's what to talk about. Fine. Now, I've heard that there are Rabbanim nowadays, not so much in Eretz Yisrael, more in Chutz La'aretz, that are matter divorced girls to take off their sheitel and not have a sheitel. What is the reason for it? I tried to find it in print. I didn't find it anywhere in print. But I've heard from people that these type of heterim are flying around. So I was trying to figure out what is the basis for that heter. Because once again, as we pointed out, it's pretty much first Shulchan Aruch that a divorcee needs to wear a sheitel. So I presume the heter that they are giving is based on this. They're using the basic premise of Ramesha, and they're saying for her to get remarried, she has a much greater chance, or it's going to be a lot easier for her to get remarried if she's not wearing a sheitel. Then she gives off the impression of a new, fresh, single girl. Whereas if she wears the sheitel, then she's viewed in society, she's viewed by this potential husband as a divorcee, and therefore it becomes harder for her to get remarried. And therefore, getting remarried is definitely worth a sixth of your value, a sixth of what you own, and therefore they are mater. I assume that's what it's based on. I have a bunch of questions on this heter, and it doesn't sit so well with me. First of all, if this woman had $1 million, right? Sometimes they do. If they, got divorced, there's money there. Maybe a lot of times they do have $1 million. Would they if you told them, you have to if you give up a sixth of your money, we're going to let you not wear a sheitel? Would they do it? I don't know. You have to see each case. Maybe yeah, maybe not. I imagine not everyone's going to be so quick to give up a sixth of their $1 million to not wear the sheitel. Because I think we should be entitled to find out a little bit. Number 2, Ramesha seemingly only allowed the sheitel to be removed for specific times in the office on the date. I presume, even though it's not mefurish in the tshuva, but I assume, because Ramesha was never being asked, does that woman have to go to shul? Presumably that woman has to go to shul with a sheitel, and that woman has to go shopping with a sheitel. It was just in the office, and presumably, and it was clear from the question, it was on the dates she didn't want to wear a sheitel. Does that mean that Ramesha is going to give a heter for blanket, not wearing a sheitel altogether? That's not pashut. And now we can even have Uri's addition. There might be a difference between in private and public. Public is a much more severe than private. Furthermore, you got to realize what's going on. The vart isn't that it's mutter. The vart isn't that there's no isser. The vart is you're allowed to be over and asay in this situation. So to say you're allowed to be over and asay in a finite amount of time is much easier than you're allowed to just altogether from for now on until you get remarried, consistently be over asay. That's a much greater chiddush, and to say that Ramosha was saying that is very difficult. Third point, I don't think this is a new reality that women feel that they look better with Rosh Perua. In fact, it's pashut. The prutzos, we see from the Mishnah itself, the prutzos and all the Rishonim, all the Achronim, everybody would go out for Rosh Perua. Why are they going out for Rosh Perua? Because they felt they looked better with Rosh Perua than their head covered. So it's not a new thing that women feel they look better with Rosh Perua. Is it a new thing that divorcees want to get remarried? No, that's not a new thing either. Yeah, sure. So divorcees have always wanted to get remarried. They always felt they looked better with that. So what exactly changed that nowadays in the last 15 years, this heter could come about, whereas beforehand nobody has ever said this heter? Ramosha was asked a very specific case, but as a general rule, there's nothing new that happened, so how can we all of a sudden now show up with a heter? And fourth point, which is something that I'm going to eventually discuss in greater arichos, is nowadays that we have the lacetop Sheitels, which are different definitions of the Metzias, of whether or not you could tell or you can't tell, but you can't tell, but you could tell, but most people can't tell, some could tell. I don't know exactly who could tell and who can't tell, but there's definitely a lot of people out there that can't tell that lacetop Sheitels are Sheitels. So once she has an option, and I'll be mater for her, this divorcee, the lacetop Sheitel, once there's options of the lacetop Sheitel, which most people can't tell, or certainly most men can't tell that that's a Sheitel, Memela, there's very little to, it's going to be annoying to wear a Sheitel, but nobody was ever matter her not to wear a Sheitel because it was annoying. So I think it's very difficult to use this heter nowadays. The only thing is, the lacetop Sheitel might get back into the sugya of using up to 60 Yunachasim. Fine. So how much needs to be covered? Next point to go to. But by the way, just back on the basic heter, most poskim never agreed with Ramosha's heter, but Ramosha was Ramosha. And if Ramosha was Ramosha, well, then Ramosha said it. If Ramosha was some joker, we would be throwing that to the side. But Ramosha was Ramosha, and therefore Ramosha could certainly say it. But in the Maisa, most poskim didn't accept it. I think in Eretz Yisrael, you will not see that really happen. But also to point out the actual case of Ramosha, maybe the date, that might still have a Timson reality. The case of the office is just not happening in today's world. Okay. Now, how much of the hair needs to be covered? So, simply speaking, it seems pretty clear from the Gemara. Rosh Perua, completely uncovered, you're over this Dereisa. Kalsa, if you're wearing the basket, if you're partially uncovered, you're over Das Yehudis. And seemingly you have to be completely covered to be Mikayim, the din, to keep the Das Yehudis. Now, I was just thinking of a little bit of a side point. There's, I would call it in the low-level Mizrahi society, where you have like women who are wearing pants, who have a lot of them wear these like headbands around the front of their head. So whereas everything else in their hair is just exposed. So I wanted to know, what was that considered? So I personally was thinking, if you'd asked me, I would have personally said that is the Isser of Das Yehudis, but Midaraisa they're good. I would think once you're wearing something on your head, then you're not Rosh Perua. You're showing that I don't go just wild Rosh Perua. I have something there. And I would have thought that would be Issa, it's Aser. But I would have thought it would be the Issa Midarabanan of Das Yehudis, not the Issa Deraisa Rosh Perua.
The whole Issa Deraisa of Rosh Perua is only Mishim Heker then? She's an Ish is Ish?
No, I wouldn't say it's hecker, but it's a greater level of lack of sneas when you go totally uncovered. And if we go back to the Makar in Saita, the Kayin totally uncovered the lady's hair. You'll see in a second that I'm probably wrong, but that's what I would have thought. That was my understanding. I looked around a little bit. You're not going to find much in this because it's Asr Miman of Shach. So none of the places we really need to discuss it too much. But I found in the Shevet Levi that he says if most of the hair is uncovered, if Roiv is uncovered, then you're over the Deraisa. I imagine he's working with Rubai Kakuloi, and l'chayra, according against my personal svara, l'chayra, you buy that Mizrahi lady that I was trying to, or the low-level Mizrahi lady, I should say, with the headband that I was trying to say is only over Das Yehudis relative to the Issa D'Oraisa. The Meister from Vazner, it seems that she's over the Issa D'Oraisa. Okay. Okay, so how much needs to be covered? We said seemingly everything. Now, if we look at the Shulchan Aruch, definitely the way the Mishnah Berurah understands it, everything needs to be covered. If we look at the Ramah says it, from the Ramah, the sideburns I'm going to get to in a second. We'll talk about sideburns and back of the neck. Outside of that, for a second, let's put those on the side. But everything on the head would seemingly need to be covered. Now, if you look in the Mishnah Berurah, it seems to be that the Mishnah Berurah says that any little bit of hair needs to be covered. There's no, the Chassam Sofer says, firstly, everything needs to be covered. Now, there is and what's the reason, by the way? Simply, the reason is, if the hair's Arva, then the Arva needs to be covered. Simple, right? Okay. Now, there's a and how do we see, by the way, one more thing actually to be clear, how do you see this in the Shulchan Aruch that everything needs to be covered? When the Shulchan Aruch is discussing, in the 2 lines earlier, the Shulchan Aruch is discussing regular erva, saying Kriya Shema in front of a regular erva. It says that the husband is allowed to say Kriya Shema up to a tefach of erva exposed, of regular erva, not here. Whereas a regular person, a non-husband, even if there's less than a tefach, cannot say Kriya Shema in front of that woman. But when it comes to the exposed hair, there's no such consideration that's made. It just says, as a blatant rule, without exception, that one cannot say Kriya Shema in front of a woman with exposed hair. So it seems to be pretty clear that the rule is no matter what. Okay. Now, comes along Reb Moshe and the Igros Moshe. We have a lot of Reb Moshes today. Igros Moshe in Even HaEzer, I don't remember what chelek it was, Simin Nun Ches, I forgot to write down what chelek. Simin Nun Ches. And Reb Moshe says a very famous tshuva. So Reb Moshe says that I didn't want to write this. I only wanted to say this Baal Peh. But now that you sent me a second letter, I can't ignore it. I can't leave confusion. And I have a chiyuv of telling people what the halacha is. So he has a whole preface where he's trying to ease into this carefully. And he says like this. He says, by the Isha Saita, the Kohen uncovered all her hair. Right? Which means, presumably, that if her hair is mostly covered, then she's probably okay. Or covered except a little bit. She's probably okay because there's no sheikhs to the Reish Peru, completely Perua. Her head was completely uncovered by the Kohen. Furthermore, Moshe's Medaik, that the Lashon isn't that her Sa'aris are erva. You now say Kriya Shema in front of her Sa'aris. I should say that I shouldn't use that for that's a brachas. But the Lashon isn't that you can't say Kriya Shema in front of her hears. Rather, it's in front of her head uncovered. Meaning the Isser is the head, not the hairs. If it was the hairs, so any 2 hairs is hairs. But if it's the head, so if the head is primarily covered and there's only a little bit that's not covered, that would still be viewed as a covered head. And therefore, Zatar Moshe, if she has, but we don't know what the shear is. So we already know from general Evra, there's a concept of pachas from less than a tefach is not considered significant. So too by here, less than a tefach is not considered significant. Therefore, a woman could, if a woman has less than a tefach over here uncovered, she could go out like that, and one could say brachas in front of the woman who has less than a tefach over here exposed, and a woman who has this less of a tefach over here exposed is not considered a chayta. However, it's worthwhile, lichatchila, one should be machmir like the Chassam Sofer and cover everything. But lemaisa, if there is a woman who is looking to leave a tefach exposed, and she's a Yerushalayim, and she has good midas, a Talmud Chacham shouldn't hold back from marrying her. A Talmud Chacham can marry such a woman. So he'll have like a little bit mixed messages in this tshuva. At the end of the day, he's saying Ikar Adin, it's okay. Lichatchila, one should be machmir not to do this. Ramosha didn't want to say the tshuva in the first place because he didn't want to spread the message that this will be allowed, which is actually what happened. In his, he was right. That is what happened. And he concludes, however, even though I think this is a bad thing, even for a Talmud Chacham, this isn't a deal breaker. Because l'maisa me'ikar adin, it's okay. And he says, don't be confused about how to, when I say tefach, I mean square tefach. Therefore, Chazal say apparently that the head is 2 tefachim this way. So with a little math, 2 tefachim times a half a tefach equals 1 square tefach. So therefore, if you're going to go 2 tefachim this way, you're only allowed to go a half a tefach back. So therefore, what's a half a tefach? 2 fingers. So 2 fingers across the width, Rav Moshe would allow. Now the Maisa, come out all the poskim argue Rav Moshe and say, Me'echatesi, what type of nevuah is this? Where's your raya? But Rav Moshe was very confident about his svara, and he didn't, that's what he held. But the Maisa, there's like no earlier makar for this. He just threw it out there from Nevuah ben Shemayim. So the Maisa, we understand why most of the poskim vehemently rejected this. But at the end of the day, once again, as we said before, Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe, but it's definitely Roya, there's definitely, I forgot one very important point. Rav David Feinstein came out, and he said that this was a Hayras Shah for a specific miyuchet situation. And Rav Moshe didn't want this to go out as a blanket heter. So based on Rav David Feinstein, and you already see some of the lashonis that indicate that in the beginning of the Rav Moshe, that it was definitely not Rav Moshe's intention for this to be a spread heter. One cannot say, I do this because I'm a Talmud of Rav Moshe. That's why I do this. You can't say that. You could say, Rav Moshe says I'm not a chayta. Rav Moshe says you're not a chayta if you do it. And that you could say. But you can't say, I'm going in the derech of Rav Moshe. That you can't say. Okay. Now, fine. Now when it comes to sideburns and sometimes back of the neck hair, which are difficult for women to cover sometimes, so especially wearing non-sheitel hair coverings, snoods, whatever. So what's the halacha with that? So the Mishnah Berurah clearly says that is totally in minhag. If you're in a place where the minhag is to cover it, then you have to cover it. If you're in a place where the minhag is not to cover, then you do not have to cover those places. To my understanding, most places nowadays, the minhag is not to be makbid to cover that, and therefore bepashtus women do not have to cover that. If you're in a place where I don't know surveys, but if you're in a place where they're makbid on this, in Mei Sharm, they are makbid on this. I would expect them to be makbid in Mei Sharm. I don't know the Metzias, but that's what I would expect. Then one would have to be makbid if they're living in Mei Sharm. Now, fine. There's a famous Aruch HaShulchan, which is often misquoted. The Aruch HaShulchan says, "B'avaseinu arabim, nebuch nowadays in our big averos, that the women go out with uncovered hair, and it was common practice apparently. I don't know the historical background, but that's what's written in the Aruch HaShulchan. Wherever he was, it was commonplace for the women to go out with their hair uncovered, and therefore he says that since this is so common, it doesn't cause hair." And Memela, you're allowed to say Kriya Shema or any Davar Sheba Kedusha in front of a woman with uncovered hair. Now, the poskim at large go, first of all, the Mishnah Berurah is mefurish against this. Probably going lafuka the Aruch HaShulchan. He says explicitly, even in a place where the women are prutzis and they don't cover their hair, it's still asur. It's arava. Now, the poskim at large go very strong against the Aruch HaShulchan. I saw this lashon in the Revavos Ephraim. I would be scared to say this, but he says there are those that say that now I understand why the Aruch HaShulchan is called the Aruch HaShulchan, because he's the opposite of the Shulchan Aruch. I'd be scared to say that about the Aruch HaShulchan, but that's what I saw written in the you can see the poskim are pretty upset about this psak. Nemaisa, what's the rationale of the Aruch HaShulchan? The rationale of the Aruch HaShulchan is that when it comes to covered here, that's subjective. Why? What's his raya? His raya is from the fact that you see single girls. You can make say Davish Kedusha in front of the single girls here. So you see that here isn't a problem. The problem is when here that is normally covered is uncovered. That's a problem. But if this here, which is normally uncovered, remains uncovered, just like by a single girl, therefore it is not a problem. So the mice of the poskim at large reject this Aruch HaShulchan. Ramosha Feinstein says, B'shas et chak, one can rely on this Aruch HaShulchan. Definitely people involved in the kiruv are always rely on this Aruch HaShulchan. Because you got to realize it gets very difficult. I had this many times in my Shabbos table, where I have somebody on my Shabbos table, somebody who's not so from, and it becomes a very big problem. Kiddush is a problem. How do you make Kiddush in front of the person? Okay, you turn to the side, you close your eyes, we can work it out. Benching, a little bit more complicated. Closing your eyes is a little bit problem unless you put something in front of your eyes. You have to put the bencher in front of your eyes. By the way, over here, there might be more room. But tzirif the Aruch HaShulchan and closing your eyes, there might be more to talk about. I know generally in brachas, closing your eyes isn't good enough. But you turn to the side a little bit, maybe hold the bencher in front of your eyes, even though it looks weird, whatever. You want to bench, so that's a little bit more complicated. You have to, the real trick is, it sounds funny, but the real trick is you say, I don't want to sit at the head of the table. I want to sit in the middle of the table or the side of the table, and you want the lady with the uncovered hair to be on the same side of the table as you, so you can look straight at the table. But it doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes you have multiple men who are going to have this problem, and it's just not going to work out. Okay, so what do you do? Okay, that's fine. I've managed to figure out the benching. I've managed to figure out the kiddush. You know where I always run into the problem? The Dvar Torah. How do you give a Dvar Torah and not face somebody at the table? It doesn't work. So in those cases, I've relied on for the kiddush and when I could, I tried not to rely on the Aruch HaShulchan personally. But when it comes to the thing that you have no choice, for that I've relied on this Aruch HaShulchan, because ein breira, and usually this is a kiruv situation. So once it's a kiruv situation, it's a chaval for this lady or this couple or these girls to be at the table and not get a Dvar Torah is a little bit of a lost opportunity. So it's
any Dvar Torah is a problem, or just Shem Hashem?
No, any Dvar Torah. Any Dvar Torah.
So why did it always be like Kriyas Shema?
So Kriyas Shema is just the example of the example of the Mishnah. Why did the Mishnah choose that example? I don't know. But that's the example of the Mishnah. But we say it's anything. We say you're allowed to think in Torah in front of a woman with uncovered hair. That we allow, but you're not allowed to speak in Torah. Well, I guess I don't want to get too involved to whether a fluffy Dvar Torah counts or doesn't, or whatever. That's maybe for a different time. Okay, weiter. So and I just want to point out, sometimes this Aruch HaShulchan is misquoted in very modern circles. This Aruch HaShulchan can be misquoted as saying that when women don't cover their hair, and that's the minhag hamakom, therefore you don't have to cover your hair. He's clearly not saying that, but I saw it written somewhere in a very, very modern website, whatever. But He's clearly not saying that. He's clearly saying, he says, Seinu or Rabbim and etc. He's just discussing Tachas Halacha, whether you could say a Davar Sheba Kedusha. Okay. Sheitels. Okay, so now we know already that a married woman must cover her hair. As we just discussed, the source, Ksubas Saita. Now that a married woman must cover her hair, the question is she allowed to wear a sheitel? Could she wear a wig? Or does it just have to be wearing, what's the best word, a snood? The tickle, what's the snood? Fine. Does she have to wear a snood or could she wear a sheitel? So, at first glance, what would be the issue with the sheitel? Who cares whether your hair is being covered with a snood or whether your hair is covered with a sheitel? So there's many potential issues with a sheitel. I'm talking about, starting off classical sheitel, I'm talking about sheitel from 400 years ago for now. Peyanachers. Yeah? So, what could the potential issues be with the sheitel? So number one is it could be marasayin. People could think that's her hair. Number two is that it could cause hearer. If it looks good, one could argue the point of covering your hair is that you're not supposed to look good in public. If she's wearing some other sheitel that make her look good, maybe that's going to be a problem of hearer, a tznius issue, so to speak. Number three, maybe she's not keeping the spirit of the law. It's true she's covering her hair, but the Torah wants her not to be going out with hair, and now she's going out with hair. Maybe it's an isser because she's going into the spirit of the law. And fourth potential issue is this das Yehudis of covering her hair. Maybe it's the idea that she's meant to do something above and beyond what how the goyim of the street look. But if she's going to wear a sheitel and look like the goyim of the street, perhaps that's not keeping the das Yehudis. And we're going to discuss these as we go along. Okay, so do we have any mekaros? So there's a Mishnah in Shabbos which is discussing the Isser of Haitzah, of carrying an Rosh Hashanah outside, and it says a woman is allowed to wear a peyanachra. She's allowed to wear a sheitel, so a wig. So comes along the Shultei Gebarim on that Gemara, and even though the focus and the chiddush of the Gemara had nothing to do with the concept of erva, rather the point of the Gemara was focused on haitzah, but he says you could still deduce from this Gemara that a woman's allowed to go out in public and wear a sheitel. Because what it's talking about going out in public wearing a sheitel. The Gemara wanted to use that example if it was also for a woman to wear a sheitel, and therefore you could see that a woman could wear a sheitel. This was early 1500s, the Shultei Gemara. Comes along the Be'er Sheva, I don't know, 50 years later or so, mid to late 1500s, and he says, no, the Shultei Gebarim's raya is not a raya. Because it's just talking about wearing a sheitel, but it obviously means wearing a head covering, a hat or something on top of the sheitel. It doesn't mean just the sheitel. And the truth is, Zak the Be'er Sheva, it's usher to wear a sheitel. It's marathayin, and it causes hair. So anybody just who thinks there's like this new sheitel versus not sheitel, this is almost a 500-year-old machlokes. So this is nothing new. Okay. Now, l'maisa, how do we paskin? Is it, do we go like the Shultei Gebarim that it's mutter? Do we go like the Be'er Sheva that it's aser? So the Ramah in Darchei Moshe, not in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah in Darchei Moshe says that a sheitel is allowed even if it's cut from her own hair. Even if she cuts, so we're definitely not talking about synthetic. We're even talking about she cut from her own hair and made a sheitel from her own hair. It is mutter. The Magen Avram and the Pri Megadim also say that a sheitel is allowed. The Chassam Sofer and the Maral Diskin on the other side say it's aser because of marasayin. So we see this once again. We just went from 500 years ago to now, we're in the 200 years a year ago range, and we see a very big machlokes about whether one is allowed to wear a sheitel or one is not. The Tiferes Yisrael, also 200 years ago or so, he's on the side that says sheitels are aser as well. And why is it aser? He says the reason that sheitels are aser is because of maris ayin. If you go a little bit more contemporary, Rabbi Vadi Yosef, he is it says in a very strong lashonis that it is clearly aser a sheitel. He says because it's maris ayin, and it brings to here. And he wants to say, even according to the Ashkenazim, it should be a problem. He said, for us Tzvardim, we never had a Messiah of this, we don't do this, no way. And even, he quotes from Shlomo Kluger, real Ashkenazi source, who says that back in the day, that, no women would go out, I guess it's from a different place than the Aruch HaShulchan, different places in Europe, whatever, I don't know. He says, back in the day that nobody would go out with their hair uncovered, so there wasn't a maris ayin issue. Everybody would understand that if a frum woman's coming out, obviously she's wearing a sheitel. But Zat of Shlomo Kluger, which Ravadi is quoting, but nowadays that there are women that don't cover their hair, so nowadays a sheitel is a problem because it's maris ayin. Who says it's a sheitel? Maybe she's from one of the prutis that come with the uncovered hair, so it's maris ayin. It brings hair, and therefore it is a problem. Okay, Lemaisa, how do we paskin? So we go to the Shulchan Aruch. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? So the Shulchan Aruch says, as the Mishnah Berurah explains it, that we say that it is allowed. The Shulchan Aruch matters sheitels. The Ramah explicitly says pas nachar, the sheitel is allowed. The Mishnah Berurah says that sheitels are allowed as long as it's not attached to the scalp. Now I was wondering why the Mishnah Berurah added that in. It was really based on the Lashonis, the Sholta Gebarim, as long as it's not attached to the scalp. I want to suggest, and I know this is not mukrach at all, but I want to suggest that the Mishnah Berurah was alluding to the fact, even if it's going to be a very good sheitel, a sheitel is allowed as long as it's not attached to the scalp. As long as it's not attached to the flesh, it is allowed. I think he was coming in, even if sheitels get better. I think he was alluding to that, but I can't prove it. Fine. The Mishnah Berurah also brings that there are those that argue. He doesn't only bring one side of the picture. He brings v'yesh cholkim. There are those that argue and say that one is not allowed to wear a sheitel. Now, usually when the Mishnah Berurah brings a din and a yesh cholkim, what does that mean? That means the main psak is like what he originally said, but he brings the yesh cholkim to show that there is an inyan of chumrah. It's not a chumrah shel shtos. That shita is not command lesa. It's not a non-important shita. It's a command isa shita. There is something there to be machmer for. The Mishnah Berurah then goes and brings the Pri Megadim that says like this: in a place where the minhag is to wear a sheitel, you could certainly rely on the opinions of wearing a sheitel. And then the Mishnah Berurah brings on the flip side the Magen Giborim, who says that in a place where the minhag is not to wear a sheitel, you're not allowed to wear a sheitel. Why not? Because it's maris ayin. Because if nobody there wears a sheitel, and all the frum women wear snoots, and you come with a sheitel, the locals won't cop what it is, and will think it's your hair. And therefore you're not allowed to do it. That's the machmir. So let's just recap. What is the Mishnah Berurah saying? The ikar psak of the Mishnah Berurah, it is allowed wherever you are. That's the ikar psak. And there is reason to be machmir that in a place where they don't wear it, that you shouldn't wear it. So once again, it keeps saying in the Mishnah Berurah, you're allowed to do it, but there's definitely room to be machmir in a place that they don't wear it. But certainly in a place where they do wear it, it seems like there's not even much room to be machmir in a place where they do wear it. Okay. Fine. So that's what we're holding. As I said, Ravadi says it's aser because of maris ayin. Fine. Rav Shlomo Zalman,
Why did it pass by the Shulchan Aruch?
it's a chiddush, right? It seems to be that the minhag of these countries was not to do it. in this.
All the Arabs all the Arabs cover their hair.
You know what? That's actually a very good theory. That's a very good theory. The Arabs in all these local places never wore sheitels and never let their everybody had to cover their hair. That's a very good point. And therefore that's probably why what helped them. The minhag was always, and that's what Ravadia writes clearly, by the Sfarim the minhag was always to not to wear a sheitel, to cover your hair. Probably based on the Arab laws or influence or whatever. But Lamaisa, since that's how they took on, that's what Ravadia is very strong about. Fine. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman says, this is already getting, more some of the svaras that you hear people talking about nowadays. Rav Shlomo Zalman says, if she looks like she's single, then it's a tznius issue for her to wear that type of sheitel. But to be clear, he didn't say it's an issue of the sugya of Gilei Rosh. He seemingly was accepting that it's not an issue from the sugya of Gilei Rosh, but it is an issue of tznius. Fine. The Shevet Levi is a little bit more machmer, I would say, than more chumradik a view than Rosh Shlomo Zalman. The Shevet Levi says there's much reason to aser sheitels. There's a lot of svara, marasayin, etc. And he also brings, maybe it's a breach of das Yehudis. So there's lots of reason to aser sheitels. But there's nothing we could do. I'm not going to get up here and stand up and try to aser sheitels when Medina Shlemus, full countries, have the minhag for so long to wear sheitels. There's no way to go and try to aser sheitels at this point. However, the machmirim, what they should do is they should wear a hat on top of their sheitel. And the sheitel shouldn't look too real.
Rav
Wosner, yes. And the Maisa, Rav Wosner, it's interesting. Rav Wosner has a chassidishness to him. Though his psak was generally viewed as a generic psak for both the Litvish and the Chassidish world, this happens to be something that many Chassidim have taken on, and the Litvish world certainly have not taken on. But that's the advice of Rav Wosner on the sugya. But once again, to be clear, his ikar psak is the minhag is you're allowed to wear sheitels, and I'm not going to go against it. It sounds like from Rav Wosner, Liutzor, he could snap his finger and make it an aser sheitels, he would. But he said, we can't. It's already accepted. He quotes the Magen Avram, the Pri Megadim, etc. They all mattered, so I can't do anything about it. But Lemaisa, if you want to know what I think is the right thing, then the Machmirim, they should wear a hat, and the sheitel shouldn't look so real. Okay. Now, what about, there's a sefer, as I just thought it was interesting, Yaskil Avdi, who says, I just thought it was interesting, so I brought down somewhere, that he says there's no problem when you wear sheitels, because the Yetzer Hara is shoylet on a person to have hearer on the erva of the Eishes Ishes here. And we have no raya that the Yetzer Hara is shoylet on somebody having hearer about a sheitel, and therefore it's all allowed. I'm not saying this, I don't know how much weight that holds, but I thought it was definitely interesting. All right, what does Rav Moshe say about sheitels? So Rav Moshe says that sheitels are allowed.
What is a clean shave?
Correct. Rav Moshe says sheitels are allowed, and he says, because, you're going to ask, it's marasayin. So Rav Moshe says it's not marasayin for 5 reasons. You gotta love Rav Moshe, his breath is, So he says, it's not marasayin for 5 reasons. First of all, we don't go and just make up marasayins. Now I saw somebody asking on Rav Moshe, Kashas on Rav Moshe, quoting different Igros Moshes, that he seems to make up his own marasayins. So why is he saying over here you don't make up his own marasayins? I think the answer is pashut. We already have a Mishnah, based on the way the Shulchan Gebarim learns it, that you're allowed to wear a pas nachras. So when there's a new shayla, a new mitzias, Ramesh might have felt he can make up his own marasayin. But something that existed for hundreds of years, or maybe, and they didn't make up a marasayin, we don't come nowadays and make up a marasayin. That's number one. Number two, Ramesh says that it's asay. We don't have marasayins on a mitzvah asay. Okay, we have to check. I don't know. I couldn't think of one to catch me out on. Then Ramesh says, number three, that since people will look at the lady and see it. Listen, this is a frum lady. If they look and they see it's a frum lady, they're gonna chop it's a sheitel, so there won't be marasayin. A very palpatish, simple svara, I think. Number four, l'maisa, people could tell it's a sheitel, so there's not going to be marasayin. Number five, since it's a common thing to have sheitels, so therefore everybody that sees this woman is going to assume that it's a sheitel. Just to explain the difference between that and what I call the third one. The third one is viewing at this woman as an individual, based on her individual cheskes kashrus. The fifth one is a societal view. Since it's normal, everybody will understand, and therefore it's not considered maris ayin. Okay, so, and Ramosha says, it seems like he was getting at the shoyl over here. I think he knew who the shoyl was. And because if you have a problem with your wife wearing a sheitel, then you can't shave because maybe it's marasayin that you use the razor. It sounded to me like he knew that was a clean-shaven person who set the shaylad. So whatever, that was kishmak. Okay, now the accepted minig in Klal Yisrael is certainly that people wear sheitels, and certainly amongst the Ashkenazim, the accepted minig is sheitel, that people wear sheitels. And therefore to say that there's an isser of sheitels, that you shouldn't be wearing sheitels, is very difficult from a sugya, from a halachical standpoint. Now when you want to get into the shayla of pritzes versus snias, then there's definitely what to discuss. There's definitely plenty of room to say that certain sheitels might have an issue in snias, if they're maybe not the right type of sheitels. But in terms of the fact that there's a problem with sheitels, is very difficult. Okay, I'm going to end with the new shayla, lacetop sheitels. So lacetop sheitels came out over the last couple of years and created a tremendous tumult. For those that don't know, a lacetop sheitel is a regular sheitel, but it has in the front a white layer that's the color of the scalp, and has hairs coming out of that white layer, so it looks like there's hairs coming out of the actual scalp of the woman. It's really like a fake scalp, and it's very difficult for people to tell that it's a sheitel. Now, I tried asking around, you hear different answers. Some people say, oh, most people still know. Some people say nobody knows. So I'm really unclear what the real Metzias is, because when you ask different people, you get different answers as to whether or not. But it's definitely harder to tell than an old sheitel. That much we know. So a lot of Rabbanim came screaming that this is a problem, this is usher. There were pashkevilim all over, whether it was in Yerushalayim or Lakewood or wherever, that these sheitels are usher. And I want to try to understand what is it all about. And they were saying that it's marasayin. That was the main claim that seemed to be coming out, is that it's marasayin wearing the sheitels, because you look like you're not wearing a sheitel. Now, I want to point out from the sugya we learned, there were, for hundreds of years. Oh, by the way, before I get into the marasayin, one other point that they bring out, I just want to say this before I forget. A lot of them are claiming that that layer is see-through. And if it's see-through, you can see the actual hair or scalp or whatever it is of the woman, and that's a problem. Which some of them are, some of them are not. If it's see-through, that part, whatever it is, that l'chayra is a problem. It shouldn't be see-through. Definitely ain't a chadami. If it's see-through, that's a problem. Let's talk about the ones that don't have the see-through thing. So, and I heard Rav Berkowitz make this claim, and I think it's very pashut. For hundreds of years, the Be'er Sheva, who says there's an issue of Maris Ayin. There's the Chassam Sefer, Maris Ayin. There's Rav Adi has been screaming Maris Ayin. The Rav Shlomo Kluger, Maris Ayin. We've had countless opinions. Tferes Yisrael says it's Ma'ar Zayin. They've all been saying Ma'ar Zayin. And what would say Ma'ar Zayin? Because you would get confused. Who's who? And Lamaisa, what's the accepted psak in the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah, etc., or Moshe Feinstein, etc., that we're not chayshish from Ma'ar Zayin. Now you could try to pickpock and say that which most people didn't, half the people got tricked in the old Sheitels, so it wasn't enough share of Ma'ar Zayin, whereas here 80% of the people get tricked, and therefore it is Ma'ar Zayin. But the ones that matter, the svaras of the ones that mattered wasn't because people don't get tricked. Mostly it was the svara because the woman has a cheskes kashrus, because since a lot of people do it, you know that women wear sheitels. It really wasn't based on the percentage of people that get switched, that get tricked. That's seemingly, I often have a hard time telling. Even the old sheitels, I didn't know whether women were wearing sheitels or not. So there's Ma'ar Zayin for me too anyways. Now there's Ma'ar Zayin for my wife. Well, who cares about my wife? You care more about me than my wife when it comes to these sheilas. L'chayra.
Somebody asked him, Chaim once, who has to be able to tell? So he said, the woman. It's like, why not the man? It's like, men look at Sheitels? So I think for sure only the women.
We may have some kashas on that psak, but okay. Now, Lamaisa, we see that we're not really, the Ma'ar Zayin issue is not really, this doesn't mean that it's okay from a priest's standpoint. I'm not discussing it at this point. But from a Ma'ar Zayin standpoint, it's quite clear from the poskim we don't care about Ma'ar Zayin. You saw the Rav Moshe, we might have knocked out one of the Rav Moshe. We Rav Moshe had 5 svaras, why it's not Ma'ar Zayin. We knocked out one. One of his svaras was, people could still tell. So now it's a machlokes who I ask whether people could tell or can't tell. Okay. So we maybe knocked that one, and we know beforehand not everybody was able to tell. It's a share point, Maybe we knocked that one, but l'chayr, what's new? It's the same shayla. So I heard somebody want to explain that it's an issue of das Yehudis, that there's a special gather that from women are supposed to look different than the non-Jews, and that's part of das Yehudis, that we look different from the non-Jews, and when you have the lace front sheitel, you don't look different. I find this very hard to understand, because I've heard from many women, the goyim don't know that the women are wearing sheitels. The goyim don't know. So from the goyim standpoint, we don't look different. Though from women, they knew beforehand that you're wearing sheitels, they know now that you're wearing sheitels. They know. Could they tell, whether it's based on actually telling or it's based on the svaras that we said? I have a hard time accepting it. I think one of two things. Now, for those that want to tie it's of art in pritzas, so that there's definitely what to discuss. And I don't think it's that different than the old shaylos or the long sheitels, because they're pritzas. And a lot of the clothes that women wear are there or are there not issues of pritzas. And I think this would fit into those same type of shaylos. I'm not belittling those shaylos at all. It could be a real issue of pritzas. And how do we define priestess? And there's certainly a lot of the way of defining priestess is going to be based on what's normal in society. So I would maybe argue, being the first woman in town to have the lacetop sheitel is probably a big issue of priestess. But if all the women in town have sheitels, there's what to debate. I know there's different ways of viewing this, but there's what to debate that maybe it's not an issue of priestess. And it's certainly not an issue of going against das Yehudis. I have a feeling some of this comes from the message that Rav Vosner was giving over. I think with sheitels, what happened is over the last 100 years, there's been a slow, progressive advance of sheitels. I think at one point in time, I think if you look in the pictures, the grandma pictures, the bubby pictures, old women's hair looked better than sheitels. Sheitels have progressively gotten better over the years, to the point that today, most women look better in sheitels than natural hair. Now, being that that's the case, I can understand, in a way we've lost some of the spirit of the law. In a way, we've something's gone wrong here. They're supposed to look more modest, and maybe now, especially with long sheitels, etc., women maybe aren't looking as modest, and therefore something kind of went wrong here. But there was no point in time that the Rabbanim were really able to stop anything, because it was all very gradual. What are you going to do? You know, how can you do it? Any sheitel over $1,500 is a problem. What are you going to do? How do you stop it? And it was all gradual. I'm saying, you look at a picture from 30 years ago, and you look at it, go home, look at a picture of your mother, your grandmother, in the picture from 30 years ago, and the sheitel doesn't look so good. It doesn't look as good as they look nowadays. So you see something's changed. So I think it's a way of some of the poskim wanting to stop it. We have something to call it the stop button and try to use it. However, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little unease when I see some of the shyness of the poskim and trying to call it an isser of yoytze b'reish perua, or it's an isser of maris ayin. And I think from the sugya, that's certainly not how I came out of the sugya. Once again, I'm not coming out of the sugya to say that it's all mutter. If the rabbanim of a town want to say that this is an issue of pritzus, they are entitled, and people should listen to the rabbanim of that town if they're calling this out as a pritzus issue. If they're calling this out as a pritzus issue, run away from pritzus 100%. And I'm not coming here to say it's all good, but from the sugya, it's very difficult to actually differentiate in which way is a lacetop sheitel any worse than a regular good-looking regular sheitel. If you want to tell me why a lacetop sheitel is worse than a sheitel from 100 years ago, I hear the svar. That we see that I could in halacha I could differentiate between the 100-year-old sheitel versus the lacetop sheitel. But in halacha I don't see any mokaim outside of the fact that it has that clear see-through thing, which as long as you deal with that, I don't see any mokaim in halacha to differentiate between the sheitels of 5 years ago and the lacetop sheitels of today. Except the price tag, maybe. But
if women can't tell, that's an extra problem.
Okay, it's an extra problem, but that was not a main part of the sugya. You look through all the mandam are saying we don't care about Marasayin. We're not choshesh for Marasayin. People are going to know that she's a from lady. That didn't change. People are going to know she's from. People are going to know in society that women cover their hair. And they do know. And still nowadays, also by the way, there's people saying, yeah, the women still know. Maybe once in a while you get tricked, but the women still know. And the men didn't know beforehand. Or some of them did, or some of them didn't. I don't know. It's a very gray, very difficult time, very difficult to pinpoint. But I'm not coming out here to say everybody should go buy a lace front sheitel, and it's fine. There may be real issues of pritus, and there may be real issues of that, and so everybody needs to speak to their rav in their community to know whether this is acceptable in this community, or is this considered pritus in this community. And the same goes with the length, and the same goes with everything else that a woman does. Once again, this does not matter. It just, I don't see it coming from the sugya of Yoitza B'Rosh Perua, but I certainly see how there's a spirit of the law issue, which I think was broken long ago, and there is a potential priestess issue, and that certainly needs to be abided by. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this week.